Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Thomas Hübl. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're all welcome. So Thomas Hübl, PhD, is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. Since the early 2000s, he has led large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma, with a special focus on the shared history of Israelis and Germans and facilitated healing and dialogue around racism, oppression, colonialism, and genocide. Thomas is the author of Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma, as well as Our World and Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. He has served as an advisor and guest faculty for universities and organizations, and is currently a visiting scholar at the Wyss Institute at Harvard University. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy. I'm curious where we're going to go.
Awesome. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah. Originally, I grew up in Vienna, and I left Vienna, I think, when I was in my early 20s, 20, 25, maybe mid-20s. And then I am living right now, after having a station in Berlin for some time, I'm living now in Tel Aviv, in Israel.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, you just have this really rich and fascinating background. How did this start for you? Do you just born and because you have this obviously it's a passion what you're doing. How did this start?
Yeah, it's true. It's truly a passion. Like, I think there are a few stations in my life that kind of formed this passion. One is that I always, already as a child, had a kind of a deep connection to spirituality, to God, the divine, but I didn't connect to the church context around us. I don't know, it always felt cold to me. It didn't feel where we live, not in general, but where I live. And so that's one thing. The second thing is when I was 16, I joined the Red Cross, and I became a paramedic and later a trainer for paramedics. And I, for 9 years, did this as a volunteer.
Oh, wow.
Pretty intensively, besides my studies at that time. And I learned so much during that time about life, society, trauma. I don't know, also serving. Like I love like this quality of serving our culture, like giving something, and not only because we get something in return, but because we care. So I think there is something in that time that really had a deep impact on me and taught me a lot about life. And at that time, I didn't know yet how to frame trauma and all this, but there are many things that in retrospect, I think were very important at that time. And then when I was 26, I left all my studies and I became I went on a 4-year meditation retreat. So I was sitting a lot of my time and I was meditating, and I felt there's a different kinds of studying that happens in silence that opened a lot of my inner world. And I think that's also where Attuned has its roots. That's where the collective attunement has its roots. That's where presencing and using like our relational moments as a kind of a ongoing meditation or contemplation. And then when I came out of this 4 years of being very much retreated, I got invitations to run workshops, and my workshops grew pretty fast. And then because my first workshops were in the mainly in Germany, in the German-speaking area, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and then in every workshop, this kind of collective dimension came. Every workshop that was longer than 2-3 days, we ended or became into like a collective trauma process. And so at the beginning, that was pretty strong because it was really like suddenly 50 people in a room touch this collective layer of the Second World War, of the Holocaust.
Oh, wow.
And it was pretty intense. But then so I thought, okay, it's just that group. But then it happened again and again and again, and like a similar process design again and again and again. And I said, okay, life is showing me something. And then I began to study that deeper. And so that formulated for me a deeper understanding of systemic trauma. And that's also what I wrote finally then my PhD about, is the individual, ancestral, and collective trauma healing process. And and then and the last 20 years, then we expanded. And of course, I did at the beginning a lot of work between diaspora Jews, people from Israel, German or European people that were interested in healing the Holocaust wound.
Mm-hmm.
We had very deep moments there, very deep, very complex, but deep. And then we started to expand into the rest of the world, as you said before, looking at colonialism, racism, genocides, gender violence, climate change.
When you were 16, you decide to be a medic and go with the Red Cross. That is amazing. And kind of like, were you getting encouragement? I mean, that's young to do that, right? It's not like, oh, I'm just going to go downtown and take a course on, first aid. Was someone encouraging you in this direction?
Yeah. My mother and my stepfather at the time, they were serving as a paramedic at the same station. And so in a way it was already in my family, and I kind of grew into it. But like I kind of medicine from very young attracted me. So I felt it also, but it's that, and it's also this kind of giving that like serving the society was something that I felt called to do. And I did a lot. I did it pretty intensively. I was still going to high school at that time. And it was a great school for me to learn about life. I mean, I saw every walk of life. I saw many people in tremendously difficult circumstances. So it trained me also to do what I do today.
When you started doing those workshops, you said that this kind of collective experience of trauma started to emerge. When that happened initially, how did you respond? What was your reaction? What was your gut reaction? Did you feel, okay, let's go with it? Or I don't know what the hell's going on. How do I deal with this? What was going on for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because in a way, I kind of intuitively knew what was happening. So I knew what was going on, but because the process was very strong, so it was a very strong experience also for me, like that many people saw visions of the Second World War and of their ancestors. And like, it was pretty strong, but we kind of held it really well. So it turned into a very positive experience over this week, and people got a lot out of it. I mean, a lot happened for people. There was a lot of transformation that happened, and I felt also how it affected me, because I was born in Vienna. My grandparents lived through the Second World War, and they weren't involved in the Holocaust, obviously, but they were going through the whole process. So I carried some of it in myself, and I felt that. So I also needed to do some of the work, obviously, on myself. And but then and but when it happened again and again, then I felt, okay, there's something in there for me. And also in my meditation retreat time, like to be dialed in or attuned to the collective dimension of life was something that I was very interested in at that time too. And then I felt, so life's teaching me through this process. And then I paid attention, and then I think I uncovered a lot of the collective. And it also spoke to me because I felt, wow, there is actually not that much work out there, and also not so much literature, given how like it's a global phenomenon. It affects every society around the world. But the research and I don't know, the amounts of publications and how much we are dealing with systemic trauma is pretty small compared to what the topic is. And I found, I mean, it's interesting, but we can talk more about that. So that's a bit the journey there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What did you, when this started to come up, what specifically did you do? How did you facilitate this such that there was a lot of healing and so forth?
Yeah. At that time, I already practiced with my groups like that, like how we hold our personal process within a collective space. So from early on, I had this intuition in my groups to practice individual attunement, but also how the group holds a collective presence for everybody in the group. So then when that came up, we had already like a group space formed that was, first of all, very safe. People already relaxed into the group space. That, I think, allowed their nervous system to detox some of that collective material, that kind of mutual safety. And then I was kind of, the facilitation was more to make sure that we keep on track with the collective attunement, and then have individual voices bring in more of the content. But whenever we touch this collective trauma field, when one person shares, there's a lot of resonance in the room of other people, that because their ancestors went, or maybe their parents or grandparents went through a similar experience. So it's strongly charged. It's much stronger than maybe other topics. And so that created a strong intensity, but somehow we managed to host that intensity, and also slow down enough that it's not overwhelming, but that we could really process. We made more space. And like that, it slowly decreased the intensity, and people felt a lot of inner shifts, movements, how the trauma started to ground itself over time. And then we broke it down to smaller groups and the digestion process. And I think it went on for 3 days, but then after the 3 days, we were in a good place. I mean, the intensity was mainly at the beginning, and then it took us, like the whole process took 3 days to ground and integrate. And so people, when they left, they didn't feel like a heavy burden or something. This was very interesting. And then we developed like a process design. And over the time, I learned much more how to modulate the intensity of such a process, and let it grow or slow down, and so then it became also a skill for me. And yeah.
So let's start talking about the book here. Before we do, I just want to take a break to thank our sponsors. We're talking with Thomas Hübl. We'll be back in 1 second. All right, Thomas. So the book is called Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. What was the impetus for this book? How did this come about for you?
Yeah, it came about because what we just shared, like the whole collective work is going on now. I do this maybe 20 plus years now. And then I wrote Healing Collective Trauma because I wanted to speak about systemic trauma, its impacts, and how it affects our societies individually, collectively. And then after I wrote Healing Collective Trauma, I thought, now I need to write a book where I speak also more to the individual process. So, and also to the skill building process of attunement, because that's a big thing that we do in our work all the time. And we train also, there are many therapists that train with us, or coaches, or people that work with clients, because we refine this very much depending on the background, how to be precisely attuned to different trauma layers, different age layers, and so on. And so I thought, okay, now we need to bring the individual work forward, the skill building on the relational level as a remedy. And then I wanted to also speak to this IAC fluidity, that trauma lives individually in us, ancestrally and collectively, and that they are not separate things, but that they are one continuous flow. And that we don't separate this as items, but as an interdependent continuum, same as we are ecosystemically interdependent all the time. And that I thought was a good book, and I wrote it in a way that it's also accessible for the broader public. And yeah, and then it happened.
How do you define attunement?
I think that our nervous systems are naturally wired to be social. At the beginning, we see this at the beginning of our life. We see this also maybe in the later phases of our life, how much we are part of communities, holding spaces for society. Like there's something that like that our nervous systems naturally pick up a lot of information, social information, relational information. And attunement is the capacity to bring that process more into our awareness and see how much data we exchange. When I feel you and I feel how you feel me while we speak, there's a lot of data flow between us. And then when we pay more attention and more consciously attention, so we can refine that skill, that we have become much more aware of the data that's flowing between us. So how our bodies pick up a lot of information, our emotional systems, of course, our mental systems. Spiritually, there's spiritual attunement, there's ancestral attunement, there's collective attunement. So there are different layers. I think different departments of our nervous system pick up different data. And I think often we are not being trained in our regular education system how to read the manual and see how amazing our bodies, our being is. And so I think that process heightened, and maybe also we speak a lot about integrating, because I can't feel you where my trauma resides. So I need to integrate that part of myself and then train it to be refined. So integration and training, how they go together and hand in hand and support each other. And then it's a refined practice. And I think for everybody who works with clients, like you know very well, so then the more we are attuned, the more information flows, and that's accessible for us to serve our clients.
That's really fascinating to me. So are you working with a lot of different therapists? You're training them in a sense. What do you feel is integral in order for therapists to understand or embody or learn to work with people who've been impacted by trauma?
What's essential for them to first, I think a deep internal commitment that when we begin to hold space for our clients, we kind of sign like kind of a contract with the universe that we gonna work on anything that comes up for us, like any difficult session, any interaction with our clients that is not clear to us. Every time I walk away and I feel triggered, I feel that some stuff stays in me and I walk with it for a longer time. It's not that that's good or bad, not at all. It's just that I pay attention to it and I use that material to refine my own being. Because the more open my own nervous system is, the more I am in touch with yours. So I think that's a basic commitment that we have to give to say, yes, when I do that job, I know I'm signing up that my whole life will be a refinement whenever it's needed. Sometimes the longer phases, it's not needed, but whenever something comes up, I'm committed. And I also engage like a system of introspection, peer-to-peer intervision, supervision. So to do that process, I'm embedding myself voluntarily in an environment that feedback can come to me and that I grow whenever there is something in my client interactions. The second thing is that it's like, I don't know, any other discipline. If you become a great sports person, usually most of the people become good athletes when they train. So our training is a constant learning process. And I think as a therapist, coach, whatever, it's not that we know, it's that we are committed to find out. And the more I'm committed to find out and learn together, of course, we all bring skills and knowledge and we need a basic skill set for it. But then I'm a lifelong learner, and every client, every group, every situation also teaches me something. And that's why it doesn't get old for me. So I walk away, every group that I give, I learn something new. It's amazing. And like it's always keeps it fresh and say, oh, wow. Nuances, like small things sometimes, but I feel it enlivens me, and that's why it stays fresh for me. And I think that's an important ingredient, that we are willing to learn. And of course, it increases our competence and capacity, but it doesn't mean that that competence and capacity becomes kind of an identity or it becomes a standpoint. It stays a fluid relational process. And I think also that I refine my attunement capacity, that I can track more and more fine roots of trauma experiences, conditioning, whatever formable substance that our clients went through, that internal residue of our development and the internal processes that need some kind of completion, that we can feel those, and we are willing to also be in the discomfort sometimes that means, and be able to be in it consciously, so that we can go with our clients to places where they, first of all, can't easily go alone, and where maybe many other people would turn away. So we stay turned towards. And I think these are just a few qualities, but I think they compose a kind of an inner attitude to deeper and deeper explore life. And sometimes in these collective trauma processes, we had Nazi descendants and Holocaust survivors, or their next generation, in one room, and I think we can go there only when we are willing to feel the discomfort, feel the tension, feel also the whole numbness and disconnected in the space, and become a holding space for that. And that creates amazing, like magical or sacred moments of healing also. So these are a few. I mean, there are for sure many more, and some ethical values and guidelines that we follow and hold, of course, and many more.
What excites me, Thomas, about what you're saying, what I identify with strongly, is use the word commitment. And I love that word within this context. What I think is interesting, you're not talking about, this modality or that trauma healing modality or that. Where do those come in? To what degree?
No, they come in with, like, for example, in our training programs, there are people that coming from all kinds of different modalities, from somatic experiencing and all kinds of other psychotherapeutic modalities. That's what I meant before. We need a basic skill set and a basic modality that we feel grounded in, that called us when we started, and that formed our first steps. But then I think the modality is that which gets us going, that which is the refinement runway, so to speak. But then it's more about how the modality allows me to become a musician that is more free to improvise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think good music, because you can't easily improvise if you can't play the piano well, so then
Right.
it's harder to improvise. But if it's so in that the modality created a certain kind of fluidity and flexibility in us, I think then the deepening happened through some of the things that I said before. And then maybe we see if the modality that we chose at the beginning is still the right one, or if we need to add some skills and some knowledge and some, practices that get us going further. That's for sure important. I want to say that I see this as very important. But I think it's also because we can also practice a modality and kind of stay on a similar level with our
Mm-hmm.
skill set and not progress into more and more refinement, where the direct relational experience becomes like the source of the emergence of the process, and how
Mm-hmm.
we are more and more and more attuned. I think that for me creates the excellence of the modality. Doesn't create the excellence, but it jumpstarts the process. But then it needs some kind of deep commitment to go to a certain level of depth and intensity. And also, I often say, what every quality that we go through with the client that we never had before adds a certain kind of remedy to our own self.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time some clients come with the same quality, we are actually transmitting already a process that we went through by ourselves. And the more of those we internalized in our own capacity, it's not even just the meeting with the client that works, it's the presence that we are sitting in
Mm-hmm.
and as that has already an effect without even seeing the client. And that quality of when we see very experienced therapists or coaches or so, there is a kind of presence that has matured over that
Mm-hmm.
time. And I think that presence does a lot of the work.
Mm-hmm.
It has a very strong impact, and it's not just what we do, it's also what we become through our journey, over
Mm-hmm.
decades doing this work.
Yeah, that to me, that's what it's all about. That's so exciting. And this commitment, what is behind that commitment? What is required of that commitment? How do you define that commitment?
I think in the deepest place, it's love. I think it's not a commitment that serves only our career. It's not a commitment, any kind of willful pushing myself to the edge of my capacity. I mean, there's maybe a lot of strength and agency and impact, of course, comes with that commitment. But either there is a deeper spiritual dimension to that commitment, that I'm committed to serve a bigger context in life. And of course, when we start off and we are more junior, so of course there are other motivations part of it, and that's very human and natural. But I think the more we mature and we become wiser, that deeper love and also the curiosity, because once it feels like a repetition,
Mm.
I would already ask a question. When somebody feels, oh, I'm doing this and it's kind of it's the same, I'm swimming in the same water, then I think we need to ask ourselves questions about the path, and not because it's good or bad, but it's something is not refining itself anymore. That's why it gets a bit old. Like when
Mm.
something gets old, it's good to look and just make a space to listen, maybe what's happening. But I think if we constantly learn something, it never gets old. It constantly refines itself. The path refines itself. And maybe sometimes we get stuck in a certain way of doing things. And our own evolution is actually wanting to go forward, but we don't let go because, I don't know, because of the income, because of the status that we got. But actually, our energy wants to go somewhere new, wants to go to a different place. And if we don't allow that, then it gets a bit of a stagnant feeling. But if we continuously follow that inner calling to go to new places, I think we feel much more inspired by what we do. It never feels old, and it feels like our soul is all the time singing. And the outcome is like generosity. The outcome is like serving. The outcome is loving. And sometimes I say, I use a metaphor. It's like sometimes when we come into the deeper trauma zones that our clients went through, I often say we ourselves and our clients sometimes need that when in the bottleneck of the trauma, when it really feels more difficult, it's like as if a metaphor, like a hand comes through the wall and reaches out to take your hand and take you through a wall that looked like a real wall, but then you find out it's actually not. It's like a hand. And that moment, I think, is so important. And that we are in a shared space when it feels very isolated, lonely, separate. And when that hand comes, I think that's a sacred moment. And maybe every one of us had such an experience with somebody at a certain time that helped us. And I think being somebody that can extend that hand is a deeply beautiful process.
Wow. Thomas, there's obviously so much to talk about. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for so long. As we kind of wind down here, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, it's obviously my main website is Thomas Hübl. Hübl is HUEBL.com, thomasHübl.com. We have a great summit every year. It's the collectivetraumasummit.com. It's many, many great speakers and a great interdisciplinary conversation around collective trauma and collective healing. And it's also our NGO. We are running a lot of programs through an NGO that's called pocketproject.org. And I think through these resources, everything else can be found. And yes, thank you so much. It's lovely. And maybe we'll continue this in another forum somewhere. But I think there's a lovely resonance here between us.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to have you back later time. Again, the book is called Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. Thomas, thank you so much. A pleasure and an honor having you on here. You're amazing. You're so inspiring.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys. It was great. I enjoyed it very much.